with that river. And I think there's all sorts of exciting things that could be done with these high-level gravels. It's not the sort of thing that's a big enough study to ever get anybody in theory, and certainly won't get any funding for it. I've sometimes tried to encourage undergraduate students from your part of the world to do projects, dissertation projects on them, but I haven't had any takers yet. I'm getting a bit near the end of my career too. I've kind of lost hope of that. Of course, during COVID, I'm never going to do fieldwork anyway. But no, I think there's some nice little projects on this stuff, and collecting a sample of the gravel, 16 to 32 millimeters, doing analyses. It's dull. It's nearly all flint, but the angularity roundness could be quite informative. So I'd be very happy to provide some guidance on that. And I think there are questions to be asked, such as, can we distinguish that this is fluvial? Can we detect different terrace levels within it? And I guess you've got to debunk the marine idea or prove it. I mean, I might be wrong. I don't think it's marine. But it's the idea that it's marine that is the source of the suggested correlation with the red crag, because that's marine. So there's no shells ever been found in it or likely to be found in it, because perched out there on the London clay, the groundwater is going to be too acid. Any shell would have long since disappeared. And there are plenty of decalcified patches of red crag that the BGS have identified as such down in East Anglia. As for dating it, I know you asked about that as well. I don't think any of the methods that you can use to date gravel, and there is probably only one, some sort of luminescence analysis, I don't think that's going to work on anything as ancient as this. And I'm pretty skeptical about the results of much of it anyway. But modelling height using theories about uplift, my recently deceased Oppo Rob Westaway, who worked for the Open University and Glasgow University and lived in Durham, which is how I came to meet him. He had a mechanism of this, and I can't remember whether in the big treatise on the Thames that he wrote with me and Darryl Maddy, published in Quaternary Science Reviews in 2002, whether these pebble gravels were ever included in that. If I'd have known you were going to talk about it, I'd have looked that up before I came on. I've got the paper on my laptop, but I'm not on my laptop here. I'm on my chum's desktop. So I can look that up and email you about it. He thought a lot of the early gravels were a bit less old than I expected. So I think they probably, it didn't look very much higher than Dodders Hill gravel in that diagram you showed. So that doesn't suggest to me it's all that old. But these various methods are almost desperation in comparison with the sort of dating that people really expect, which is giving you a number. I don't think there's any technique that can do that for gravel in our part of the world. You need some sort of volcanic input or something like that to be able to date gravel. If you've got a few bits of pumice or something in it from a nearby volcano, that'll do it for you. But we haven't got that. Don't think the Eiffel ever chuck stuff in our direction often enough. So dating, I think, is a bit of a forlorn hope, but there's still plenty of interest in it. Questions to be answered. Have I said enough?
But a lot.
Happy to answer questions and generally enjoy discussion of it all.
Well, my question is, do we know the sea level? I mean, obviously, I haven't looked it up and I don't know, but the sea level at the time that we're talking about, what I'm struggling with is that the Stanmore gravel is 150 meters elevation. Was the sea at that level, or are we just looking at working out what the uplift has been in the meantime?
Well, we don't know whether it's warm or cold. We don't know whether it's a warm climate deposit or a, it's when they say ice age on that was it on a poster? Someone questioned it's as ice age. I think that is using ice age to mean Pleistocene. In the same way that they used to use glacial with a capital G to mean Pleistocene in some of the 19th century and possibly even early 20th century literature. And it's all very well to think it's Pleistocene or even Pliocene, but even the Pliocene had fluctuation between warmer and colder, although the fluctuation scale was much less before about 1 million years ago. So we've only had really cold glacials in the last 1 million years. And only then did ice get anywhere near London, I would think. So I wouldn't think there'd have been a glaciation nearby when these gravels were formed. But if they were cold climate, then the sea level would be substantially lower than it is now, and whatever the land has done. I mean, and I think the land has uplifted. If they were warm climate, the sea level would probably be much the same as where it is now.
But there's
no reason to think it's warm climate.
They're 150 meters up at the top of hills. I can't work it out.
Yeah, well, that's because the land has risen by that amount through the Quaternary, and it was Westaway who found a mechanism for this. I saw it as erosional isostasy. You know, the land rises when ice melts. It's depressed by the weight of ice, and when the ice melts, it bounces back up. But this has to be something that isn't reversed, because this uplift has not been reversed. This uplift is something that happens as a result of erosion. Well, I suppose that's not reversed either, because material is continuously being removed from the land and put in the sea. And the North Sea is subsiding under the weight of it, and has been throughout the Quaternary and probably the Tertiary as well. And the land has been rising through the unloading of that, because we live in an area of net erosion. These river terraces are very ephemeral things. They're not substantial in any way. And mostly the land area is eroding. So that to me is potentially enough to explain the erosion, but Westaway came up with a sort of positive feedback mechanism for explaining why it's so powerful in areas of certain types of crust like ours. It doesn't happen everywhere. That's one of the puzzling things. You don't see terraces and rivers everywhere. But I'm digressing beyond where you need to go, I think. Yeah, I think it's uplift. It's definitely. I mean, we've got I mentioned Boxgrove, didn't I? The Boxgrove raised beach nails this for me. Have you heard of that? 40-metre high raised beach near Chichester.
Alan, do you know about that? Not sure.
It's one of our most famous Pleistocene sites. It's got human remains from it. Huge numbers of artifacts have been excavated from it. It's got wonderful fossils, and it was studied mostly in the 80s. And it's to say, I think it's about 42 meters above sea level, and you would have to melt most of the ice on the planet now to get sea level up there without uplift. And I think we can tell from the ice, and it's a little bit older than most of the ice in Antarctica, but I don't think there's any indication that the ice was depleted to that extent as recently as this. So this is about 500,000 years, 500,000 years old, this beach. A little bit older than the glaciation that diverted the Thames, probably the interglacial immediately before that glaciation. And there's no indication that there was enough ice missing from the planet to correlate with that interglacial, so it's got to be uplift. If you melted half the ice now, you would put sea level up around there. We're doing our best to do that, but it's going to take a long time. If you go back to glacial conditions with ice trundling down towards Hertfordshire, then you would lower sea level by 100, 150 meters, 130, I think was often the quoted figure. And that's about where we would have been in the cold parts of the Pleistocene. And I don't think this gravel at Stanmore can be as cold as that, because it's before the really deep glaciations began a million years ago. I think it's probably earlier in the Pleistocene than that. So it wouldn't have been so intensely cold, but it would have. By and large, I think many of us came to the conclusion that you needed cold climate for the rivers we're used to be carrying gravel, because they don't now, do they? I'm not sure the extent to which that holds, because you do find some interglacial gravels here and there, including Swanscombe. So Peter's the man for that. What do you think about that, Peter?
Well, as a generalisation, I'm not muted. Yes, as generalisation, I think you can correlate gravelly beds with cold climates. You're more likely to get gravelly deposits in such situations. But even today, and we're in the middle of an interglacial, if you have a really heavy storm, gravels are moved along, but they tend to be some relatively rare occurrences, whereas in a cold climate, there would be almost perhaps annual events. So it's a question of frequency, I think, there.
I wonder whether there were any other questions about the course of the River Thames while you're with us. I think we had some interest shown in the origins of the Thames. I'm not sure. I see Jeremy Krause is here, and I know you were interested in that. I don't know if there's anything you would like to ask while you have the chance. But you're muted at the moment, Jeremy, sorry.
I was born in Pinner. I used to ride my bike all around northwest London, so I know where all the hills are and where the gradients get steeper and where they get gentler. Imagine a maniac teenage boy coming down Clamp Hill. The thing which makes me think that uplift is part of this is that the landscape has been altered so considerably since the end of the ice ages. And I use that I know we're in an interglacial, but that alteration of the landscape seems to be so considerable. And the thing that puzzles me more than anything else is that everybody talks merrily about the Colne Valley being the line of the Thames, which sits outside a geological structure called the London Basin. You can see this in many parts of the world. You can see it in the Jura, or you can see it in the Appalachians, where you get these strike rivers that follow lines of structure. So you could have a river Thames going along a line of structural within the chalk. That reversal, sending the Thames back, as it were, to form the River Colne, which then comes back to join the Thames, usually Uxbridge. Interesting enough, paralleled, I think, sub-paralleled by the Pin, which to me acts almost like a gutter, like a catch of the hills to the north of it, all the way along. It's an interesting river, the Pin, because its valley is quite deep. And the Pin begins where we're talking about. And I can't in my head get those height changes that would bring rivers from south of the London Basin all the way across to north of the London Basin, unless there's been a structural shift in the land right across the region where we're talking about. So I'm back to Wooldridge and Linton. I'm glad they get a mention, because I was brought up on Wooldridge and Linton and the structure of southeast England. And we have all these things like river capture and wind gaps and dry gaps and dip slope streams and scarp streams and the rest of it. So I'm a bit like everybody else probably. I don't think I have a simple answer to this, but the more we ask these questions, the more questions we could be asking. I agree though with the comment made. We do need, David's comment, we do need to do a sphericity analysis on the pebbles if we can get enough out from a reasonably clean exposure on the SSSI. And that will give us some idea of their formation. And looking at the pictures tonight, they don't look like a storm beach. But you know, that's just a personal comment. I'm no expert, by the way.
People have studied the pebbles and the matrix where they've been able to find it, and used shape analysis. They've used the SEM to look at sand grains, for instance, and seen marine features. These are all likely to be reworked from the tertiary. That's the thing, because most of the source for the gravel and the matrix is probably the tertiary marine beds. Although some of those tertiary beds, of course, are also fluid, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think, going back to what you were saying, Jeremy, I think you have to think of a sort of north slope of the North Downs, dip slope of the North Downs, extending further north to a Thames that was further running through the Vale of St Albans. And you know, we can trace the Medway flowing all the way to Clacton in the extreme east, and that was the situation. And you were saying, I think, that it isn't the centre of the London Basin. It's only got there with its diversion south.
Yeah, essentially, yes.
Yeah, and that's a puzzle. I mean, the Thames seems to have flowed to Haysborough or something like that.